And Professor Shihada, please take a couple of photos during the session.
Yes, yes, I will. I will. I will. I will. I will. Yeah, please. You can. We can start now.
Okay, it is a pleasure to be interacting with students at Al Aqsa University. That is a part of the world that is so historical and a part of the world that I'm very keen on visiting, and hopefully it will happen someday.
Yes.
Uh, I I am Naila Ali Khan,
Yeah.
and I am originally from Kashmir. I have been in the United States since 1998. My forthcoming book is entitled Educational Strategies for Youth Empowerment in Conflict Zones,
Yeah.
Transforming Trauma. So, the idea of writing this book came from the lectures that I gave at rural university and college campuses in Kashmir
Yes.
a year ago, as well as in 2017, I believe. I
Yes.
go to Kashmir every year, every summer.
Great.
I still have family there,
Yeah.
and I try to spend a month or two there every summer.
Yes.
And I try to interact with students at various university and college campuses.
Yes.
So I will read out. My book will be out early next year,
Yeah.
inshallah. So early 2021. And for the purposes of this session, I
Yeah.
pulled out a couple of relevant pieces from my book,
Yes.
which I thought would interest all of you.
Yeah.
So I will read out a few pieces, a little about my interactions with students in Kashmir, a little about the reasons for writing this book, and then I would love to hear from all of you. Is that okay, Professor
Yes.
Shahada?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay, so when I spoke at various rural university and college campuses in Kashmir, I wasn't sure if students felt integrated into social and intellectual communities of the college or university where they were studying. From my research on the struggle and survival of students at academic institutions,
Yes.
particularly for students who shoulder the demands of family responsibilities and jobs as well, I wasn't sure if they were integrated academically as well as socially within the institutions where they were studying. Given that the institutions I spoke at cater to rural populations, which have been greatly impacted by the unrest in Kashmir,
Yes.
it was important for those students to not feel isolated and to be able to reach out to faculty members. Having been raised in a very restricted environment, which was made more constrictive by the vagaries of conflict, these students walked on eggshells. And as far as I could tell, they lacked the vocabulary and other tools to integrate their experiences into their academic work.
Yes.
Students' feelings of isolation are enhanced by their inability to raise questions in the classroom. Having been raised in Kashmir, I am well aware that in that culture, students are not encouraged to voice their opinions and raise questions that an academic worth her or his salt should be prepared to answer. I remember being particularly struck by the hesitance displayed by female students at the Government College for Women in Anantnag in South Kashmir, where I spoke in the summer of 2019. My presentation at that college was on theoretical frameworks within which historical and political events could be analyzed. It didn't take me long to realize that my talk would be more impactful if I encouraged students to ask questions that they thought were pertinent. The students at that academic institution were rooted in their family contexts and background dimensions as rural, underprivileged, and gender minorities. They sought motivation through stories of conflict, persecution, ethnic and gender discrimination, and a disrupted social life. Although several of those students were not well integrated into the academic and social dimensions of the college, their tenuous status as survivors in a conflict zone gave them direction to make it through college. I distinctly recall my discomfiture when I realized that my highfalutin vocabulary was creating an invisible divide between me and the students I was addressing. It was difficult for me to endure the expressions of incomprehension I saw on several faces. It was at that critical moment that I put my paper aside and proceeded to forge dialogue with the students. All of them had undoubtedly come of age in fragile circumstances. Many of them shared anecdotes and stories that illustrated their experiences as rural and gender minorities. They recounted their sentiments of insecurity, impermanence, and feeling objectified in a zone that was trammeled by competing religious and political discourses. Their nagging sense of marginalization as a pigeonholed ethnic group and as women could act as a motivating force for them to pursue higher education if accompanied by tangible family involvement. But I didn't see enough evidence of that tangible family involvement. With the pursuit of higher education and the opportunities that creates, these students could see how gender roles were changing in their neck of the woods. But I got a clear sense of male faculty members not wishing to concede that space to their students, because that would result in the challenging of chauvinistic attitudes and loss of traditional social roles. So my point is that even academics, professors, need to question and interrogate their own biases, biases that they have been raised with, which are cultural as well as social. Now, I saw a similar dynamic at the government college in Birwa, which is in central Kashmir. At that college, I gave a talk on women's empowerment and the role of women in education. I gave that talk in 2018. Again, my attempt was to encourage students to voice their opinions without fear of reprisal. I noticed during the question and answer session that the female students were relatively quiet and hesitant, and I had to work hard to draw them out. At the risk of alienating the male students in the room, I beseech female counterparts to speak up. Now, in response to my earnest entreaty to the female students to speak up, a charming young man magnanimously said that he wondered why his female classmates were hesitant to express their opinions. His seemingly innocuous statements provoked a quick response from one of the female students in the room. She acerbically said that girls and women had not been allowed to share their opinions with the communities they were part of because they feared being mocked. She reminded her male classmates that they had not been acculturated to notions of gender equality and expansion of economic opportunities for women. I could clearly see that she and the other female students in that room were developing a sense of gender consciousness. With the female students of that college, while the female students of that college identified with traditional culture and felt the pressure to toe the line by not vocally challenging gender norms, they recognized that higher education provided them with opportunities to map their stories of survival and persistence. But I came away with the nagging feeling that a lot more could be done to enable students to function as productive members of their classroom communities. Iman, did you have a question? Did I hear your voice?
Any question?
Iman? I
Man,
heard of
please,
a question.
please mute yourself because we will keep the questions later. I will mute them.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
and the questions will be after the session, please. We have time to receive all the questions because the number of participants are increasing.
Okay. Okay. Great.
Great.
Now, while researching my book, I spoke with a specialist who has conducted workshops on gender empowerment in South Asia.
Yes.
She is an international peace building expert. Her name is Dr. Paula Green. And in the interview that I conducted with Dr. Paula Green, she said, all sectors of student and adult Kashmiri society would benefit from a national project of carefully constructed dialogues,
Yes.
thereby breaking the silence and isolation, acknowledging grievances and harms done, grasping the development of competing narratives and perceptions, and enabling Kashmiris to redeem their nation's soul through a shared love for the land and its people. Dr. Paula Green went on to say, together, the population of Kashmir might find the courage to face the truth of their brokenness and betrayals, mourn their losses, and turn their despair into empowerment for the sake of their own healing and the health of future generations. Through this process, the people of Kashmir from all walks of life could offer each other the respect and dignity that each individual craves, commit to meeting the basic needs of all members of the community, and reweave the tattered web of connections, restorations, and mutuality in which all can safely thrive. In my book, I have employed psychologist Laura Brown's definition of collectivist ethnic culture to emphasize that in Kashmir, Palestine, and other parts of South Asia, people may be particularly vulnerable to insidious trauma because harm done to one extends to others
Yes.
through bonds of family connection. With family often defined well outside the limits of biology, the potential for trauma to be a factor in the distress experienced by persons of target group ethnicities is high indeed. So, how can a culturally competent educator effectively consider cultural and gender identities in order to weave the implications of traumatic experiences into the complex identities of the students? And if this didn't make sense to you, please ask me during the question and answer session. I would be happy to explain.
Yes.
I will tell you a little more about the talks I gave, um, and that might hopefully, help you to relate with students in Kashmir. Um,
Yes.
all right. I observed over the course of my interactions with students across the Kashmir Valley
Yes.
that they were caught in a double bind. While some of them clung to their religious and cultural identity in response to attempts by the federal government of India
Yes.
to assert its centralizing authority, students failed to recognize culture as a site that is dynamic and energized. And culture is a site where psychological emancipation can be achieved. The cultural space that students in Kashmir are living in does not encourage contradiction as a space of creativity, but on the contrary, it encourages homogeneity. And homogeneity, or not recognizing differences, not recognizing heterogeneity, even in the same religious and ethnic community, breaks the artistic spirit. So every time I would interact with students in Kashmir, I would think, how can I encourage them without imposing my own ideological position on them to examine the psychological predicament in which they are caught? So I recall a bright young woman at Abdul Ahad Azad Memorial College in central Kashmir asking me if I thought it was necessary for Muslim women to cover their heads in the workplace. Here, I would remind all of you to keep in mind that all the female students in that audience had their heads covered. I chose to see our shared space in the lecture hall as an opportunity to explore and co-construct what it meant to break the walls of silence about nuanced religious and cultural norms. I was aware that challenging or even thinking through such norms was discouraged by conventional understandings of morality and propriety. But I believed that as an educator, I could not choose avoidance as a strategy. So while keeping the sensibilities of the students I was addressing in mind, I considered it incumbent upon me to encourage the students to undertake